Okay, thank you, Jesse. So I'll go ahead and do introductions and get us started here. This session is going to be a little bit different. We called it the Fireside Chat. What we really wanted to do was hear from a customer about their experiences with analytics modernization. So we invited Matt Wallace, who's the Enterprise Analytics Manager at a grocery retailer that's based in Rochester, New York, to join us and to talk through some of their journey at their organization. And we also have Rochester, who we heard from earlier, doing his round 2 reprisal on everything BI and analytics with us as well. So thank you both for joining us for our chat. And I guess, yeah, excellent. To get us started, Matt, if I can ask you to give us maybe a high-level overview of the current state of data analytics in your organization, just to kind of set the stage here.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of get everybody set, I kind of figured we're going to go down this path. So in a quick nutshell, thought I would share a couple quick slides that I think will kind of level set our organization for you and give you some perspective. Is that coming through okay, Liz?
Looks great.
Perfect. All right. So one of the things to kind of get started is I'll start from the back end and I'll just kind of build things up. On the back end side of things, we are running as our enterprise data warehouse, we are running Netezza. And the Netezza platform has been something that we've been on for a long time, and we recently upgraded, coming from what was for those of you in the know, a Striper box, moving up to this newer system, the hyperconverged system. And we bought and installed 2 base plus 2 systems on the back end. So they are somewhat redundant in nature for us, but they offer ability for us to do different analytics on different systems, and gives us a lot of flexibility having both boxes working together. From an architectural standpoint, we do run Cognos Analytics on top of it. And just to kind of give a quick overview of the architecture, we do have a dedicated website for it that we put in is using something called the F5. The F5, for those of you who are not familiar, is a hardware system that allows us to assign artificial addresses internally, as well as work with things externally, and allows us to do load balancing and failover on the systems. That allows us to do a larger infrastructure, as you can see, based on the architecture, where we have 2 web servers. And because we are using virtualized application tiers, we decided to go with a number of smaller systems because it gives us a lot of flexibility around how we handle high watermarks when we get a lot of users in the community utilizing the platform. Also allows us to take platforms down, do maintenance, and then put them back without ever interrupting the end user community. Rich will probably comment, color comment along the way as well. We've been I'll comment on a couple things as they come up about some changes that we've been making towards upgrades. And it gives us a lot of flexibility with a dedicated content store down below. Everything designed for load balancing and failover, so that we have more of a bulletproof infrastructure. From a data science perspective, like anybody, we are a multi-tool environment. We started out with IBM SPSS, and that has been a big focus of ours, but given the nature of the environment, for a variety of reasons, we have other tools, not the least of which is Jupyter Notebooks going into the system to tie in with the Cognos platform, but also some supplemental from R, Databricks, and Python. And to kind of paint a picture for everybody when we talk about things today, in 2012, and that's the milestone where I'm going back to, just because it was a simple milestone where we were really kind of getting started with a lot of the Cognos Analytics platform in earnest. We had 106 distinct regular users, people who logged into the system. There were different numbers of licenses and so on, but these are people who actually logged into the system and utilized it on a regular basis. And over the course of 2012, there were 70,000 query executions against 2 data sources. It wasn't a terribly significant use. It was getting some traction, and what it was being used for was valuable, but it was not as pervasive as it is today. During that time, we'll say a thing happened, and we took off and we started using the platform a lot more. And that puts us today where over the last 12 months, we had 1.15 million logins. We have 6,000 distinct regular users, people who are in the system on a regular basis, and then 8,700 active users that are in the system. As you can read, 3.7 million report executions in 2020, and then so far we're on a pretty good clip in 2021 to obviously eclipse that here in the next couple weeks. Certainly boosted our number of data sources, increased the schedules, and really the big thing is the kind of the kicker at the bottom is that the average average number of report runs, we were doing about 7 runs a minute in 2020. And right now we're doing about 13 queries a minute, and one about every 4.6 seconds in 2021. So the systems are getting some pretty good usage and seeing a lot of value for the organization.
And I'll just add the logins, these regular users, they run the gamut from folks in the corporate office to folks throughout the departments and the stores, right up to and including the people whose names are on the building. So this is a enterprise-wide, top to bottom, pervasive business intelligence and analytics platform. And you might wonder, how do I know this? That's because I work for Matt Wallace on a regular basis as his Cognos architect. That's one of the roles I am playing, which is kind of why I'm on this part of the show, if you will.
So yeah, and that's exactly it. And that's why we've got Rich assisting. Now, my only issue here is I don't know how to get out of sharing this, but I apologize.
If you move your cursor to the top center, Matt, you should get a drop down.
There we
includes
go.
A stop sharing button.
Thank you.
And this is why I work for the man.
That's why we have Rich designed over there, right? But it's actually a great point. And Matt, thank you so much for that overview. I think we saw just a tremendous amount of growth that you've experienced over the last number of years in really a huge user base. And and I know we chatted before, when I first saw your architecture slide, I was like, why do they have 8 application servers going? But now it makes total sense to me, right? It's a pretty large environment. And I know you try to be nimble, so maybe you can explain a little bit about why you have that set up.
Yeah, in a number of ways, things have been, yourself, the last 18 months has been a little crazy. And our time before that leading into it's been a little crazy. And one of the things that we had started with way back when, I think Jesse mentioned it, was a health check. And we started out, and Rich and I started sometime back with a health check, and we looked at the systems and said, hey, fun fact, you're pegging your systems, you're hitting, your user community is filling up the systems, you're hitting a high water mark. And we said, all right, let's make a few adjustments, let's address some things. And then as the user community grew, it started to become more essential that we keep the systems up at all times, that we reach the multiple nines and keep the systems online as much as possible, because the systems are always being utilized. So Rich and I worked together, came up with a system where we can move things in and out of the cluster, essentially utilizing the built-in Cognos infrastructure, and make changes, make modifications, and then put them back, and then take other servers out. And then as we need, we don't always utilize all 8, but when we need them, we bring them on, and when we don't, we scale them back.
Yeah, that makes sense. And and I think as we get further down our discussion, we can tie that into your modernization journey, because it's a different approach. And like we heard with Greg's session, this whole idea of kind of a dynamic environment that scales with you as you need to grow, or you can scale it back down when you need to. So you don't have to just have like the old fashioned, let me have 2 servers, right, where I'm installing things. it's definitely a different approach. So appreciate that. And you kind of alluded to this, but I want, if you can talk a little bit more, obviously in the last 18 months has been very different from other years. How has COVID impacted your organization and specifically your team and what you've had to do?
Yeah, as I said, it's been challenging. We've needed more data than ever. I'm sure as you saw and as many of the people on the line had seen, grocery stores across the United States experienced some significantly different times than we had ever experienced in previous years, going in and cleaning out literally everything on the shelves. And that put us in a position where we had shortages, we had issues, there were supply chain questions, there were limits on products, there was all kinds of changes in how we managed data. And when it came to doing things like forecasting or predictability, for a period of time, all of that went out the window. And so it really became more important to monitor the here and the now and what was selling, and even tracking down to how many customers are in the store, how many transactions are occurring at a given point in time, and utilizing that to help govern foot traffic and patterns in the stores.
Yeah, and that's something, obviously I'm the director of advanced analytics for LPA, so data science is really near and dear to my heart. And I think I saw what you experienced with other clients as well, where they just weren't sure how to move forward. You couldn't necessarily use your old models, right? Because
Sure.
everything had changed. So it's trying to figure out new ways to analyze and to build new models that can help you move forward. So I think everyone can probably appreciate that.
Well, and it definitely changed the way we worked, and because of some of the reporting, by utilizing better reporting and getting more timely information and getting it in a more targeted way, as you know, sometimes you look even further back to move forward. So
Right.
we skipped. There was time periods where we just said, well, this time doesn't exist. We're just going to go back to a time that did exist, and we're going to utilize that to model and to pattern things moving forward, and started trying to provide more targeted information and reduce the noise. There are things that you monitor because they're interesting and you want to know what they are, and then there's things that you utilize and develop so that you ensure that people get what they need to make decisions. And your conditional formatting, your exception-based reports, your things that really highlight trends and differences. And that's really what we started to focus more on.
And Matt, could you maybe also comment on how quickly we matured the world of e-commerce reporting as a result of COVID?
Yeah, you're referring to some of our intraday?
Yeah.
So, and what Rich is referring to is that was actually a pretty neat thing, as I alluded to, needing to understand some of the things that were happening in the stores, where shipments are going, what's the effect of those shipments are. We moved to a model where we were doing near real-time reporting on staging data that was coming in. So every minute or so, we're pulling data out of all the stores and seeing what's there. And normally we would wait until the end of the day to do a close and report against that. But instead, throughout the day, we developed a dashboard that would provide, within, say, 4 or 5 minutes of somebody scanning something, it was on the dashboard and we knew what had happened within the store. So we were seeing real time, I say near real time effects of what's happening across the entire chain.
That's really exciting. I think especially in your business in the past year to be able to build that capability and provide that to your end users could be super helpful for decision making. So I guess thinking about some of the shifts in the last year, I can see, Matt, that both you and Rich are working from home. So how has, as am I think many of us on the line probably are, how has remote work come into play for you?
It's been interesting. It was kind of funny. We're normally a very in-person group, a very touchy-feely, work together kind of group, and fortunately for us, we had already started to move towards things like Microsoft Teams and a collaborative environment, anyways, as part of a natural progression of our organization. And so it just became a matter of making sure that people had better headphones or, something simple like that. And we shifted very quickly. And fortunately for us, same thing, LPA and shameless plug for you guys. You guys were right there with us and adapted not only to our technology, but to the entire process as well of going remote and working remote. And essentially because we operate a cloud within the organization anyway, it wasn't that big of a shift to just say, well, we're just going to do the same thing from somewhere else.
Right. So that's great. You're already kind of poised and set up to move to the remote work environment.
Yeah, the Cognos platform, I mean, we're essentially operating a web page for the end user. So we weren't installing the software and we weren't doing physical manipulations in person. Everything that we could do, we started to do virtually.
Yeah, and just, based on the numbers that you shared before, your usage last year was really high, and this year we're only halfway through the year, and you're already at almost at the same usage rate, right? So
Yeah,
I can only imagine it's going to be more for the rest of this year.
without question. And I think one of the big things was, and one of the benefits was having a higher user community meant that we can't be there to touch every computer and work as closely with every person along the way. So we started prepping for this, before we even knew that COVID was a thing, by making sure that we got some of our ducks in a row. We started working on training. We started working on our end user communications, and we started putting in some of that infrastructure that was necessary. It's very different working with a large user community than it is, say, 70 to 100 users, where you could conceivably make it to every desk.
Right. That makes sense. And I guess that's probably a good segue to talk maybe more broadly about your modernization experience and strategy. So can you talk to us a little bit more about what that means in your organization?
Well, a few things. I mean, I'll take it from two approaches. One is, how are we modernizing, and the other is what did we learn along the way, I guess. And Rich can Rich can attest to it as well, and he'll probably comment. Is I think we learned to rely on our resources much more than we had in the past. We worked together. Communication was key. It was absolutely essential to making sure that we got the job done right, and communication was the thing that made it work. We broadened our our data sources that we worked with as we went through and needed to expand the data sets, and we needed dynamic dashboards. And the dashboard that we were talking about is one that just sits and it automatically updates on its own. It's one of the Cognos dashboards that you just set it and forget it, and it just goes. We changed the way we take in requests to make sure that we were funneling information through. And a big change for us is we shifted the entire team to Kanban style approach, using an ADO and Microsoft ADO board, which is a Kanban board for moving things through the system. It's more of an agile approach. That kept us dynamic so that we could keep up with the pace, and it actually allowed us to really manage a lot of the Cognos work better. The team was communicating, the team was working together. I didn't have to be in constant communication with you to see what you were working on and how it was flowing through the system. And to your point of modernization, that's one of the key things that we did, is to start modernizing that way by changing the way in which we manage work. That's positioned us a lot better to go with one of our key strategies, which is really the democratization of data, to use that public term that's out there, where we're really trying to remove the silos of data, make sure that everybody starts to become data literate. Everybody has access to Cognos, that self-service starts to become much more of a thing for everybody, and that we're not centralizing usage and report development, for instance. One of the things that we did do is we took the training programs that had been developed that Jesse mentioned, and they were developed by Rich, and thankfully I cheated by having the actual guy who wrote the training on site. So it made it a lot easier, and we took those and we started going out and utilizing that as a custom training program for us, to train everybody across the organization and start empowering people to access the data. And from there, because we kind of went through that hockey stick growth period, kind of going from those 106 users to thousands of users, we've gone back and we've said, hey, we're going to focus on specific models for specific analyses, and we're going to fence the users off a little bit and make their lives simpler, not deal with all of the data, but deal with some of the data. We're simplifying our onboarding process, even going back and as big as our infrastructure is that was outlined there, we're retooling the way that we even do our software upgrades. So we're minimizing the outage. And I think Rich did our certification environment just the other day, and I think we were down for a half hour, something to that effect.
And it's a 4-server environment, just for folks to, so 4 servers fully upgraded in about 30 minutes.
So we're looking at a production outage of about an hour to do everything that you saw on screen. It's a big change. We're rethinking everything, and I think the key for us, and Rich, you might agree, is when COVID hit, we kind of threw everything on the table and said, okay, attack everything and figure out what you like, what you don't like, and then prioritize from there what needs to change, because there was nothing that was off limits if we felt that an upgrade or something was warranted. We didn't say, oh, well, that's my favorite thing. We said, nope, everything can be changed if it needs to be. And as a result, we've been pretty innovative on how we're handling things, and now moving down the path of Jupyter Notebooks, heavier emphasis on data science, and really starting to move toward mobility.
Yeah, I'll just build on that. We've delivered remotely 6 separate 3-day training cycles to create new report authors at this org, and roughly right, 50 new people doing self-service who used to submit requests for reports, who are now writing reports. And then after the training, we established a setup where they could just drop time on a calendar during what we're calling office hours, kind of like your professor has office hours, so that after the training, as they went and they tried to use the tool in the real world, and they ran into issues, they had a built-in way to get expert advice to move them forward. So it wasn't we'll train you and then we'll never talk to you again approach. It was really an ongoing relationship between what is becoming a community of practice, a center of excellence, really, and these end users who are being enabled. And then we've got users in various stages of enablement. We've got some users who are using data modules, who are modeling new data and using data sets to create some analyses that need to be interactive but don't necessarily need to be live. And a data set's a terrific way to build a purposeful data set, right? That is very performant, and that you can schedule an update that where it makes sense in terms of the cadence of data. So modernization of approach, right, and all the good things that Matt laid out. Modernization of just accessing what Cognos brought to bear as far as the new capabilities, like data sets, like end users modeling, like uploading files, where end users can combine their data with enterprise assets to come up with new analyses, and the infrastructure to support them, as opposed to an infrastructure to actually build the analyses, because that's just not scalable.
And I'll add to that, Rich. One of the things that we did, and I'll say, again, I don't mean to shamelessly plug LPA, but one of the best things that we did pick up was the training that was written, because we did an ROI analysis, and with all of the releases that IBM does and all of the changes and things of that nature, by buying into the training, it was the best way that we could, and cheapest for that matter, way that we could get end users trained in a quick fashion. And the training that Rich is talking about reaching out to the end users, we basically had 5 areas of scale if you wanted to move up. Is we had an introductory piece that we wrote ourselves that basically, if you want to fall on a mouse and get some data, this is how you do it, and this is how you get started. And then from there is the basic reporting, advanced reporting, and then dashboards and data modules. And we've had several users who have gone through the entire process and invested in that time so that they can become key points that are outside of IT. And that's been the value add for us, is to start developing those people outside of IT that we can rely on, that have those skills, to interact with us, to use those office hours to start to develop, and really be satellite support as we try to go through a conversion process, if you will, of being the sole providers of reporting to people that are assisting in internally consulting for others who are developing through self-service.
Yeah. I think what you've outlined is really interesting, and it mirrors a lot of what I'm hearing from other customers about what they're interested in, establishing some of the new capabilities like you talked about with self-service, mobility, data science. How do you deliver those in a way that is scalable, but that also enables the end users? And I think user adoption and the change management piece of that is so critical, especially when we're talking about being in a remote environment where folks aren't on site with you to sit in a classroom and go through training. How do you engage with them and get folks on board and skilled up so that they can be self-sufficient moving forward? So, I really applaud the work that you've done. I know Rich has done a great job on training. He's a great trainer. So,
Thank you.
yeah. But I know that it's a challenge. So I guess thinking about that, it sounds like you've been, as an organization, you tried to be thoughtful in terms of the use of time and your planning for modernization over the last year and a half or so. Were there any challenges or maybe key learnings that you can share for the folks on the line here about your experience in that space with modernization?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, at least I know if I was sitting on the other side and listening to this right now, I'd say, well, I'm sure they've got a team of 15 or 20 or something of that nature. And I think it's important to note, we're a small team. We're a very small team. There's 4 of us right now that are corporate employees, and then we are supplemented by LPA with a couple of additional individuals. And I think it's, the key teachings for me was that you have to do a lot with a little. You have to be creative. We're always looking at what the next big need is and how to utilize our time best and get ahead. One of the things that we have had to do, and it's a difficult thing, but is to start pushing back and sometimes say no to things. and use that time to counsel the individuals to come back and say, yes, but if you got that information, what would you do with it? Is it just informational? Is it just a nice to have number? And if it's a nice to have number, I'm sorry, I got to put it at the bottom of my pile. If it's an essential number that you're going to use to take action and make decisions and drive the business, great, you just moved up. And in its prioritization of those key items, but also keeping in mind to make sure that you're targeting the executives and the people who also make sure that you can do what you do on a daily basis. And that's where it became essential to have a strong relationship with those individuals and really start changing the dynamic, changing the conversation, because we were only as good as our team, and we used our relationships with the business to start expanding our team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's probably a challenge that other folks on the line, and I know other clients I've spoken with, especially over the last year, where unfortunately, even teams that might have been bigger before are smaller now. So how do you do, equal to or more with less resources? So you do have to be smart. You do have to prioritize, especially, and saying no, which I know is incredibly hard. I know from our standpoint as consultants, and you're serving the business, right? You're a consultant for the business internally. So
sure,
it's hard to say no, but there are times where you have to do that. You have to do that prioritization effort. So I know that that's challenging.
It is, and one of the things I think that has been most helpful, and we talked a little bit about saying, okay, let's redo our data sources a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
One of the key learnings that we started with was, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we gave everybody full access to the data, and we started to include all of the fields, and you start to include everything, and it's very helpful, and we're trying to be nice. And then you realize that most of the users don't need half of this stuff. And so what you do is you scale it back, you work with the business, you find out what they really need, and then you create a data source that is just those things. And then if people mention that something's missing, you include it quickly because you've got the underpinnings through the data modules and the underpinnings for the data sets and things of that nature. But you don't overwhelm them with all of the fields and all of the content and create an insurmountable entrance, a barrier to entrance for the end users. We've really worked to kind of take that barrier down and say, what's essential? How do we get people on board quickly? How do we promote that self-service?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, self-service is huge. And Rich, I know you alluded to this too, where you talked about curating some content for end users so that they didn't have to come back and ask for, oh, I need all of the data, which we hear all the time, right? From end users, give me the data, I need access. And it's true on one hand, right? They do need access, but what do they need access to? They don't need to see everything. It can be overwhelming and slow things down. So why not have some curated content to get them going? And if there is a gap, then you can help fill the gap, right?
Great.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that all makes sense to me. And before we move on, I know you're just thinking again about either lessons or challenges. We talked about scalability. Was there anything on the technical side with upgrading or testing that you had to keep in mind over the course of modernization?
I think as the infrastructure grows, and you certainly grow that number of users, it's to try and figure out how and when and
Mm-hmm.
what you want to upgrade. I think the number of upgrades that come out and the releases that come out have changed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much more frequent, and there's more development, which is great. I'd love to see that. I love that the machine is moving forward and the development is going. But it becomes essential to really determine when you want to jump in and what release you want to install and where's in testing. It's as we've looked at in the past, if you've got 50 users and you make a change, that's a piece of cake. I can correct that problem. In our case, not to say that we're huge by any means, but with the number of users, if I make a change, it's very important that I take into account what that change is. And Rich has worked with us, and we've set up a very small development / prototype environment where we test out a lot of the new releases and we say, hey, this is good, this is bad, this is what we like. And we test the impact on a small subset of the users. By having those self-service users out there, we can engage some of those users and say, what do you think? What do you think of this feature? What do you think of this function? And we get feedback, and that tells us whether or not it's getting closer for prime time upgrade.
Right. You know, and on top of that, right, that testing, that prototyping of the new releases allows us to really arm our support people, right? So, you know, we have thousands and thousands of users. They don't call Matt whenever they have a question or a problem, right? We have a help desk, if you will. And if we're going to roll out a new release, the influx of calls that would come to that organization, you know, goes up, right? And the more the user interface changes with an upgrade, the more calls they get. So part of the having this infrastructure in place is it enables us to understand the questions that our really mature users have, and then try to infer from that what our more casual users might note and need guidance on, and arm our help desk with all of those information in terms of job aids, or this is what's changed, this is the old way, this is the new way, and really get out in front of those questions so that what comes back to us after the help desk has handled the large majority of questions is really only the more significant, something's truly odd going on that we didn't anticipate. And so, you know, the process that we've adopted of having a prototype and then a development and then a certification and then production has really allowed us to use that to really curate a release. And when we finally get it out to the end users, we are highly confident that the information accuracy is maintained, that nothing has gone a little odd with that, right? Because the query engine constantly changes. But also that we have armed the people who support our end users as first line of defense with what they need to know to be able to quickly close out questions that are inevitably going to come in whenever you do that kind of a change.
And as you look across the, you know, from 11.0 to 11.2, there've been a handful of releases, you'll say, in between, and not to pick on Greg, but every release something moves, and so as a result, you have to keep tabs on things and decide when is the right time to make that shift for the end users, because it's if you don't, you scare off those self-service users that are starting to make their way in. You scare off the people who rely on it to fall on a mouse and get data, and everybody in between. And you want to make sure that people are comfortable and are capable of moving through seamlessly. And if we pick our points, as Rich said, we arm the support team, the help desk, who gets those calls, and they assist us in making sure that things are a seamless transition. Takes us a couple minutes to put together a transition document and say, hey, here's the most common things that you might get calls on. And that saves us a bunch of support tickets down the road. And I think, you know, as you talk about lessons learned, half of it has been just solid communication of making sure that you're open and clear about what's happening, what's changing, and you take those few minutes to build the infrastructure so that you save yourself hours down the road.
Right. Yeah, it's that front load, you know, to save yourself downstream. And your communication is always super important. So obviously we've heard today, and you both referenced, you know, Cognos upgrading and 11.2. So I'm sure folks are wondering, what are your plans for 11.2? Do you have plans? How does it fit
in? Right now, 11.2 has, you know, we've outlined that it'll go into our prototype in testing. Obviously, very curious. Want to see what features it brings and what changes. Obviously, because of some of the interface changes, it's gonna be there a while in our prototype. We're gonna stabilize on 11.17 FP3. I believe is.
Right. That is correct, sir. Wow.
Yes. So we're going to be on that one, but the performance improvements, the reduced JavaScript footprint, the optimized queries, improved search, Watson moments, all of that stuff is of great interest to us. And it's something that we definitely want to see come to fruition and become part of our everyday process. It's just we have to test a little bit first. As you saw, we've got a handful of reports that are out there that we want to make sure that they upgrade seamlessly and smoothly.
Sure, sure. I want some Watson moments too, by the way. So, all right. So I guess, with that in mind, and you're going to follow your process, right, for prototyping and testing, thinking about the new version of Cognos, and obviously there are some interface changes there, so that will impact some of the way you might tackle user adoption. But how does Cognos align, more broadly in terms of your analytics strategy and maybe some of the other analytics tools that you're using internally?
I think it's fair to say that Cognos is probably, to date has been a pretty much up to about a 90% option for us. We are constantly evaluating other tools because the business is constantly saying, hey, I saw an ad for this, or I saw this, or somebody wants, a new tool because it's shiny or does something slightly different, or they're unaware that we can do something in particular. So that's why we work with the business to try and figure out what the other technologies are best at, what is appropriate for us. Our goal has always been to minimize other tools and really focus on a key set of infrastructure and build that out and push it to its absolute limits. That said, because we own a lot of Office 365 and because a lot of other organizations are utilizing these tools as well, the business has started to look at things like Power BI. And what we've done is we've acknowledged that it's very difficult to be a single BI environment at all times, but and there's absolutely zero plans to rip Cognos out. In fact, our plans are to expand it. But what we are going to be doing is looking at things like Power BI and the ever-present Excel and figure out how to embrace these tools in a better way and utilize those to complement our environment versus fight and constantly play whack-a-mole with them. We're going to utilize them in the best way possible and figure out which tool is good at what, and embrace those strengths and move forward that way.
Which I have to say is very exciting for me. I think from my earlier introduction, you guys all heard, I'm focused on both Cognos and Power BI services at LPA. So, I, like all of us, right, I'm always looking to add value wherever I go and for whom I work. And so with this, I'm lucky I get to exercise both sides of my brain in terms of the role, if any, that Power BI might play, right? So that's been a real joy for me.
And I think, Rich and Matt, this is something that we see across our clients, right? I think it's very rare anymore to have an investment in a single platform for whatever, right? And I see that all the time with data science. Your slide earlier, Matt, it's very familiar to me because that's where we play, right?
Sure.
And we have to be conversant with those tooling and technology, and it's bringing to bear, decades of experience to help, identify a path forward. And Rich, you alluded to this in one of the previous questions that we had addressed here in our chat. But I want to focus a little bit more on it right now because I think it's relevant when we're thinking about how to manage, an enterprise analytics environment using, Matt, as you referenced, you have a handful of resources. It's not a huge team. You need a mechanism, a way to really keep things aligned and keep things moving forward. So I know that you focused in the last year on building out a center of excellence. So I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about that and how that's impacted your decision making as you think about supporting end users and what they're requesting regarding data and analytics.
Yeah, I mean, a big thing for us is we try to support those end users has really been starting to move towards is a center of excellence, an approach to try and say, how do we get a handle on everything that we have? And more importantly, I think the thing for us has been, how do we leapfrog ourselves? That's been an initiative that we've always had out there. And for us, the center of excellence has been kind of a key component for our development, because it's a way for us to start building a much stronger partnership, as we've talked about, between the business and the IT teams, as we really strive to push more complete and accurate data, more access to tools, a more powerful analyses, and the big push is to really promote literacy for all people within the organization on data, and that's been a big focus for us as we change, and that's that's getting us to think differently, and as I said, put everything on the table so that we're ready to kind of jump over what we do today and kind of go to the next level of analytics.
Mm-hmm. And I love that concept of leapfrogging, because you're not just resting on your laurels. It sounds like you have a really good thing going right now. You've had a lot of growth, but you're still striving and looking ahead, right? And I think that we can all learn from that we shouldn't just necessarily be content with the status quo. We should be thinking about, all right, what's the next thing coming? How can we prepare for that? And be more prescriptive about it, or proactive as opposed to reactive. So I really love that concept. I think it's really forward looking on your part.
Well, I think it's easy to it's easy to fall into a situation where like a request comes in, it's for new report. Sure, I'll build a new report, I'll send it out. Oh, you want a little dashboard thing? Sure, we can do that, and you put it together and send it out. When these new releases come out, like 11.2, and all of the functionality comes out, we go through and we analyze all of it. And like anything, there's features that you look at and say, yeah, no, that's not it doesn't pertain to me, it's not essential to me, I don't necessarily need it. And then there's all of the other things that you look at and say, wow, these are neat things that I think could really be incorporated. And that's when we start putting them into research and development. And that is something that for a little while, just due to just being busy and being a small team, we'd stepped away from some of that R&D, and that is essential to determining those next steps. And no matter how difficult it is, whether it's an hour a week or you dedicate somebody to it for a couple days here or there, it becomes critical to putting that roadmap together and determining those next steps and where you're going to move to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I guess, along those lines, thinking about putting together that roadmap, it makes me think about roles and responsibilities too. Do you have a structure for that, with the Center of Excellence?
Yes. I mean, the Center of Excellence has been something that has been a really neat evolution of things. And from a structural standpoint, I will say what has changed our adoption, what has changed our usage for the entire process, and even driven the formation of the Center of Excellence, is having executive support and having a sponsor. And I know it sounds cliche, you've heard people say it before, but it is truly critical. It's difficult to get a groundswell from the bottom up. It's much easier to get from the top down. Initially, in order to get that traction, I will say that we kind of looked through the organization, and we were fortunate enough to find an executive very close to our team that we were able to say, hey, what do you think? What's the, what do you think of the ideas? What do you think of the direction? And we had a little bit of initial bottom-up conversation to say, hey, how, do you think this is a good idea? Unbeknownst to us, there was already conversations happening at that level, and we kind of met in the middle by having that conversation. And it was so great because we looked at the individual who we thought, wow, this person's going to be really supportive. Not only were they supportive, they were already active in that approach. And by combining forces, it opened up a whole new world by having that sponsorship. And I think sometimes it starts out in a little bit of an unstructured way, and eventually, water finds its own level and it sorts itself out. And now we are fortunate to have a committee of executives that are driving the ideas and the concepts and the general direction. And then we have a community of practice that is pushing the ideas and actually implementing.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you. And you're right. Executive support is huge. Having that executive steering committee to keep you on track is important. And having the community practitioners, that's kind of the whole package, whole structure. So I'm sure it's going to be successful. I guess one last question, because I do want to leave a few minutes to open up for audience Q&A. Related to the Center of Excellence, what's the biggest future initiative that you're looking to tackle?
I think, some of the things that we talked about, simplification and self-service. I think there's probably two key initiatives that if I had to pick, sophisticated mobile reporting is one thing that I really would like to see as a strong initiative. And the other thing is, as we go through the simplification process, is ensuring that we not only document our measures, but we separate measures from KPIs. And KPIs being key performance indicators, and really helping the end users determine, okay, which ones drive the organization from a reporting standpoint, and which ones are measures that are really good at helping drive the rest of the organization. As I mentioned, the management team has a lot of those in place, but it's about utilizing the tools to carry that messaging throughout the rest of the organization, and utilize the tools to appropriately define those for every individual.
Awesome. Well, that's really exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing how that all goes. I'm sure we'll get good reports back, right, Rich?
Absolutely.
On progress. So, well, thank you so much, both of you, for participating in the chat. And Jesse, I'm going to turn it back to you to see if there are any questions from the audience.
Thanks, Liz. Going through these now. Matt, there's a few related to external data sources that your team might be using.
Sure.
Can you share any details on what you've been assessing or currently using for your environment?
Oh, I lost the last bit there.
For your environment. So in particular, some of these look data science oriented. So are you using any vendors in particular for external data to augment your reporting data that you guys are currently leveraging?
Yeah, there's we augment. I mean, I think probably the biggest thing is looking at for demographic data. That is a valuable tool in and of itself, and that's one of the big things to augment with. And then of course, as Liz will smile over, we are still evaluating and looking toward weather information as well. Those are some of the big pieces that we have utilized now, and the value of demographic data in and of itself for data science and some of the additional analytics is huge.
Great. No, thanks, Matt. And you've got a pretty sizable Cognos environment based on some of the metrics you shared earlier. can you share how are you tracking all these users? How are you managing your licenses, or what are you using for auditing? Are you using any tools like Modio to assist with the administration process?
Yeah, believe it or not, we've embraced Active Directory in a very strong way, and we could not have survived without Active Directory, and that's one of the things that we utilize. We utilize the direct integration right into Cognos Analytics. So we manage all of the user community through AD groups. As part of our simplification process, we're looking to utilize fewer groups versus more. But we basically divided it in three separate ways: is the license, the type that you receive, basically providing how much functionality you get in the tool, the environment that you have access to. Are you in the certification environment as well as the production, or are you just in production? And then content, and that was all broken down through AD. And the add-on to that we did do is we segmented separate content areas, and we now have very highly literate users in some of these other areas. We have opened up, I'll call it report administration capabilities, not tool administration. That's a very separate function. But given those key power users that we've selected in each area, the ability to modify the reports, govern the content in that subject area, and allowed them to move ahead with adjusting some of that, and that makes some of the governance easier.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I'm going to go ahead and ask one of my questions now. I think we're through the submitted questions, and we have 3 minutes left. So what you and Chester architected kind of reminded me of Greg's presentation. Looked like a lot of containers that you guys are standing up and down. So are you considering, a Cloud Pak type deployment for Cognos? Is that something that you've assessed yet, or because it's very, what you guys described sounded very similar to what it sounds like the product is going to start to do in Cloud Pak.
Yeah, we've certainly assessed it, and it's something that is continuously on the radar. Part of, to be a little bit of a downer, one of the things that we've been waiting for is to wait for both the on-prem and the cloud pieces to be at parity. There's been some, along the way, there've been some key functions that we still utilize that are somewhat legacy type items, but we want to still see those. And a lot of that's been moving towards the cloud. As they approach parity, it starts to become a very simple question of, yes, cloud offers up some easier ways to go in a number of capacities.
Great. Well, again, Matt, thank you so much for sharing, your journey there. These are the types of sessions that, in feedbacks from these types of user groups, these are the sessions that always people appreciate the most. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
Rich and Liz, thank you so much as well. And Mr. Keaton, if you are ready to jump in, I believe we can get you started 1 or 2 minutes early.
I get to start early. That is exciting. All right.